Two of the prisons shown in this film are known as Monsters Mansion. One of the prisoners that you'll be meeting murdered all of 22 people and is now rotting away at Britain's highest security prison. These are Britain's 10 worst prisons and their 20 worst inmates. And speaking of hellholes...
Another night, another prison riot. These inmates at HMP Swaleside were in control and relishing it.
Sex offender and murderer Jordan McSweeney, who was born in 1992, was one of the instigators of the 12-hour riot that unravelled in December 2016 at what is, as I record this, officially the worst prison in the country. Located in the Isle of Sheppey in Kent and holding some of the most dangerous men in the country, HMP Swaleside has the highest rate of violence of all prisons. In 2025, 6 inmates were assaulted or stabbed on their very first night in the prison, and prisoners routinely carry weapons around, knives and drugs being routinely brought into the prison by drones. Inspectors have called the place filthy, condemning its dilapidated flooring and mouldy showers, while inmates are often locked in their cells for 23 hours a day, and the prison's gangs are forever waging violent wars. Before we discover why, during Christmas 2016, serial offender Jordan McSweeney, along with 59 others on A Wing, set fire to their cells and caused all other kinds of damage to the prison as well. We should understand that when McSweeney stomped 35-year-old law professional Zara Aleena to death, which he did in the early hours of June 2022 in Ilford, East London, he was meant to be back in prison. Having stalked Zara for some minutes beforehand, the perpetrator pounced on her when she reached a residential property with a wide, paved front driveway, at which point there were no other people on the street. The attack that followed was captured on domestic security cameras. At the driveway, McSweeney grabbed Zara from behind and dragged her to the ground into the darkness and out of sight from any passers-by. He had one arm around her neck and one arm over her mouth. She struggled and tried to fight him off, but she couldn't. The man kept control of her and pulled her back down onto the ground. He spread her legs open and she again fought back, but again he kept whacking her and pulled her back to the ground because she'd actually got up again, and he dragged her across the driveway. By this point, Zara had been rendered unconscious. We know that because in the CCTV we can see that she's now lying still, not fighting back, not moving in any way. The perpetrator then removed some of Zara's clothing, spread her legs open again and essayed her. He then stamped on her body with immense force at least 5 times. He then went away, but after walking a few metres, he came back again and stamped on Zara all over again with such force that he had to steady himself by holding onto a balustrade. He then searched Zara's body and took some of her possessions before leaving again. However, he then returned for a 3rd time. This time he bent down as if he was looking for something, and then one last time he gave her a violent stamp. The incident lasted 9 minutes. McSweeney returned to the caravan in nearby Valentine's Park where he'd been staying and went to bed. Zara's body was found by 2 couples who walked past. Zara was unconscious, she was struggling to breathe, she had blood all over her face and had her legs at an odd angle. She was rushed to the Royal London Hospital with severe blunt force head trauma, and she also had bruising to her neck and to all 4 of her limbs, as well as injuries to her genitalia and signs of asphyxia. In total, she had 46 separate injuries, including lacerations to her scalp, bruising to her face, a fracture to her nose, and a severe traumatic brain injury, because the place where the perpetrator had stamped on was mainly her head. Zara had lost so much blood that a transfusion was of no assistance, and she was pronounced dead at 9:58 a.m. that day. Her causes of death were her brain injury, the prolonged compression to her neck, and blood loss. In other words, she'd been strangled, she'd received several severe blows to her head, and she'd been stamped on. Having recently qualified as a solicitor, and in fact having worked at none other than the Royal Courts of Justice for 5 weeks before the moment of her murder, Zara was an only child. Her loss has, of course, been a total devastation to her family. The man who murdered Zara Aleena, Jordan McSweeney, had been released on licence from his latest sentence, and yes, I'll be presenting his history of offending in due course, on the 17th of June 2022, but a week later, on the 24th of June 2022, his licence had been revoked on performance grounds, namely his failure to attend his meetings with his parole officer. On Saturday the 25th of June 2022 at 8 p.m, McSweeney went to the Great Spoon pub in Ilford. With him was his friend Kevin McKenna, whose caravan in Valentine's Park, Ilford, McSweeney was living in. Whilst at the pub, McSweeney got drunk. He was seen on CCTV speaking to a woman outside who tried to put his arms around her and to put his hands on her bum, but she pushed him away. He tried again to do those things, and he also tried to kiss her as well, but the woman backed away and went back inside the pub. Shortly after 11 p.m, the man was kicked out of the pub for coming on to a female member of staff against her will. McSweeney's subsequent stalking of all of 4 women, including Zara Aleena, which the man promptly embarked on after being chucked out of the pub, plus the man's interaction with a 5th woman that he apparently knew, was captured in full on CCTV. Thankfully, 3 of the strangers that McSweeney followed were able to escape him. Sadly, Zara Aleena wasn't. When McSweeney next spotted Zara Aleena and started following her, he may or may not have recognised her from the Great Spoon, where she too had been drinking earlier. Afterwards, she'd gone to Champ's Bar on Chapel Road with a female friend, and the two stayed there until 2 a.m, her friend getting a taxi home while Zara walked. McSweeney turned to crime in his early teens, burgling houses in his very street and committing numerous violent offences, including racially aggravated assault. He was also on all manner of drugs by this point in his life as well. In 2009, he was convicted of assaulting a police constable, and in 2010, he pleaded guilty to offences of ABH and battery, the latter in a domestic context. To be exact, he beat the you-know-what out of his girlfriend of the time because she was, quote, going on, unquote. In 2018, the man pleaded guilty to possessing a bladed article in a public place, and in 2022, he pleaded guilty to 5 offences of possession of a knife or other weapon in prison. He's got a lengthy record of adjudications in custody, including for assault and threatening, abusive or insulting words or behaviour. Altogether, before his act of murder against Zara Aleena, between 2006 and 2022, the man racked up a total of 28 convictions for 69 offences. He got people to trash A-Wing at HMP Swaleside during Christmas 2016 because of cuts that had been made to family visits and because inmates had been having their cells raided and having their possessions confiscated by the screws. In August 2024, the man was facing criminal proceedings relating to an alleged inappropriate relationship with a prison teacher by the name of Hayley Jones. However, the charges against him were dropped later that year when Jones herself pled guilty to her charges and later received a 9-month prison sentence. In late 2022, for the murder of Zara Aleena, McSweeney got life with a minimum of 38 years. In November 2023, he won his appeal to have his sentence reduced, his new minimum term being 33 years, on grounds that, as he knocked his victim out early on in the attack, she didn't feel that much pain. Why the appeal judges couldn't see that the man had no right to lay a finger on Zara in the first place, which means that they had no right to give him credit for knocking her out as quickly as he did, as if the man did this with the specific intention of sparing the woman pain, I can't answer. Then again, this is the same criminal justice system that, in May 2026, let 3 teenage boys with 10 grape convictions between them go free. So, as I record this, Jordan McSweeney is holed up in another dump of a prison where, yes, violence is part of daily life. HMP Pentonville, North London. Our next killer is at HMP Bronzefield, which means that if ever she gets into a fight with a fellow inmate, the screws will probably just lead them both to it, so I hear. First though, if I've got you hooked on the video so far, do subscribe, give the video a like, drop a comment when you're ready, and donate. Hit the thanks button below, I'll appreciate you. being left in your cell and ignored, not being allowed to go and have your meals, not being allowed to get medical treatment, and being physically searched with obvious and unjustified aggression. This is what happens to at least some inmates at HMP Bronzefield, according to ex-Bronzefield lag, or lagess, and author Sophie Campbell. Being essayed by prison staff and getting jugged, having boiling water thrown over you, happens to some inmates as well, and staff never hurry to break up the physical fights between inmates that frequently take place. Lesbian relationships, similarly, are prevalent, and inmates will, in some cases, screw in return for favours. Beinash Batool, who jointly murdered her 10-year-old stepdaughter Sara Sharif, is on House Block 4 at HMP Bronzefield, which is an area reserved for paedophiles, if you get my drift, and child killers. She apparently plays out with none other than Lucy Letby, the former neonatal nurse doing 15 whole-life prison sentences for multiple murders and attempted murders of newborn babies, but who, reliable and impartial medical experts say, never harmed a single baby, and earns pocket money with her job in reprographics, I'll call it, as she mainly does photocopying, which she hates. Now, how did Beinash Batool end up doing life at HMP Bronzefield for the murder of her stepdaughter? As soon as Sara Sharif went to live with her father, Urfan Sharif, and his new wife, Beinash Batool, which happened in 2019, Sara having been born in January 2013, she started suffering physical abuse on a daily basis. The things that her father and stepmother did to her were seen by her older brother and by her 4 younger half-siblings. When her father's younger brother, Faisal Malik, came to live with the family in Woking, South England, he saw the abuse against his knees coming from her father and stepmother as well. With assistance and or just encouragement from his wife, Urfan used to strangle Sara, bash her with a cricket bat or with a metal pole, belt her and tie her somehow to radiator pipes in order to burn her. On one occasion, with Beinash's help, he burned his daughter on the bottom with an iron. There were several occasions where he and his wife tied Sara's hands together behind her back and then covered the girl's head with a plastic bag and duct taped it to her body to catch her blood, before battering the girl and inflicting other horrific acts of violence on her, her head clearly being the main part of the body that they attacked. One morning, Sara fainted in the kitchen, having had no sleep the night before because her father had made her do sit-ups all night long. Urfan called the slaps that he frequently gave his daughter happy slaps. I don't know what he called the acts of pouring boiling water over her. Sara's teachers and neighbours, who were all aware of the never-ending violence against Sara, did nothing, Sara's father removing his daughter from school a few weeks before he murdered her as well. In the last few days of Sara's life, Urfan and Beinash kept her locked in her room, made her wear a nappy because they wouldn't let her use the toilet, and barely fed her. Her father beat her to death with a metal pole on the 8th of August 2023. But even if he hadn't, due to the 2 serious brain injuries that he had caused her in the 10 days before that moment, Sara would have died soon after then anyway. Sara was found through her autopsy to have over 100 injuries, including the 2 said brain injuries, one of which in particular having left Sara in extreme and ongoing pain, a shattered hyoid bone caused by the many acts of strangulation coming from her father, burns to various parts of her body, fractured fingers, bite marks to her left arm and to the inside of her left thigh coming from her stepmother, who was, it would seem, an aspiring vampire, and wounds to her scalp caused by her hair being ripped out of her head. She was also skeletal due to the fact that her father and stepmother had basically starved her. I don't know why Urfan and his wife did what they did to Sara, the 2 choosing, thankfully, not to be violent towards their other children, keeping in mind though that Beinash wasn't Sara's mother. Neither do I know why Urfan's brother, Faisal, never tried to stop them. Sara's mother, a Polish woman called Olga, who got divorced from Urfan in 2015 after 6 years of marriage, had long since disappeared from the lives of both of her children, Sara and Sara's big brother. Urfan had had a string of Polish girlfriends, in fact, and was violent towards both them and their children if they had any. He abused his women in other ways as well. As for Beinash, She ran away from home at 18 to escape the arranged marriage that her parents wanted her to go through, and she wanted to marry someone that she had chosen herself. She also reported that she had been abused in some way, don't know what way exactly, by both her uncle and her grandfather while she was living at home. She did get married to the man that she had wanted to marry, but it wasn't a legally registered or legally recognised marriage, and they soon split up. She then got married again in a non-legally recognised way to another man, but then he went to prison for heroin smuggling. She then met a new man, Urfan Sharif, and got married to him, and that was the first of her marriages that was actually legally registered. Beinash was born in July 1994, and as you might have already worked out, her family were strict Muslims. When, straight after Sara was murdered, the family fled to Pakistan, Urfan called over to the UK to report to the police what he'd done, claiming that he had legally punished his daughter, but that he had beaten her up too much. Over in Lahore, with Urfan by her side, Beinash recorded a video in which she insultingly described Sara's death as an incident, and then she complained that she and the family were having a tough time where they were. After willingly returning to the UK to avowedly account for their actions, Urfan, Beinash and Faisal wouldn't talk.
What happened to Sara?
No comment.
What did you see?
No comment.
Whose choice was it? How you left Sara?
No comment.
You know, Dawn's just said, as you said in the video, you want to come back to the UK, clear your name in the UK courts. Well, here we are. This is the start of the process. So why would you not speak to us now?
No comment.
Who did that to Sara?
No comment.
Do you love Sara?
No comment.
Did you care about her at all?
No comment.
That's the end of the interview.
We're here because we're trying to find out how Sara died.
फैसल इससे पहले कि मैं इस का इख्तिताम करूं इस इंटरव्यू का हम यहाँ पर इसलिए मौजूद हैं कि सारा जो है वो किस तरह उसकी मौत हुई है
Who is responsible for her death?
और उसका जिम्मेदार कौन था उसकी मौत का
No comments.
Okay.
In my view, this little girl was tortured.
कि मैं जो लफ्ज़ इस्तेमाल कर रही हूँ कि टॉर्चर उसके ऊपर किया गया था वो मैं ये नहीं कि मैं कोई इस तरह का कोई हंगामा करने के लिए कह रही हूँ लेकिन इस लड़की इस बच्ची को बहुत ज़्यादा जो है सदमा दिया गया है
And you were either actively involved in torturing her.
या तो फिर आप इसमें शामिल हैं कि उसके ऊपर जो टॉर्चर सारा जो किया गया है
Or you were just sat there going, it's not my problem, I can't do anything.
या फिर
and involved in that way.
या फिर आप का ये था कि भाई मेरा मसला नहीं है ये खुद जाने तो फिर इसमें इस तरह की आपकी शमूलियत है
No comments.
And what did you think the outcome of your actions would be?
आपकी क्या सोच थी कि आप की जो कार्रवाई है उसका नतीजा क्या निकलेगा?
No comment. Just give you one last opportunity now in this interview.
इस इंटरव्यू में मैं आपको एक आखिरी मौका देना चाहता हूँ
to tell us what happened to Sara
कि बताएं हमें कि सारा के साथ हुआ क्या
and what was your involvement.
और आपकी क्या मुदाखलत थी?
In December 2024, for allowing Sara's death, Faisal, aged 29, got 16 years. For Sara's murder, meanwhile, Urfan, then aged 43, got 42 years, while Beinash, then aged 30, got 33 years. As I mentioned, she hates her prison job because it is literally the first time in her life that she's actually worked. Previously, she was always supported by men. Our next antagonist is a cold-blooded mass killer who, in his tour of Britain's nastiest prisons, has gone from Belmarsh to Frankland and back to Belmarsh. In other words, to hell, Marsh and back. When Lord Geoffrey Archer, a former Tory MP and best-selling novelist, did 2 years at HMP Belmarsh in 2001 for perjury, he nicknamed the place Hellmarsh, and he didn't mean it as a joke. HMP Belmarsh is Britain's most secure prison, and it has a particularly high number of terrorists and other really violent and dangerous criminals. The place is overcrowded and it's overrun with drugs, knives and gangs. Archer witnessed so many abuses against inmates, both by other inmates and by prison staff, or screws as many of us call them, that he literally couldn't believe what he was seeing. I once saw Lord Archer at the book fair in Madrid. This was before he went to prison, so at that point he didn't have a criminal record. However, he was on record as having said that black women in England are ugly. So as I walked past his stall, in my mind, not out loud, I said, "Que te den por el culo, cabrón." And then I carried on walking past, and it was a very satisfying moment. Anyway, getting back to the hellhole known as HMP Belmarsh. The place is in Thamesmead, South East London. It was built, or opened rather, in 1991, and it was the first prison to have been built in London for over a century. On balance though, I'd say the place was too good for Hashem Abedi. On the 22nd of May 2017, at the Manchester Arena where Ariana Grande was given a concert, 22 people lost their lives when a bomb was detonated. This was the single deadliest act of terrorism and the first suicide bombing in the UK since the 7th of July 2005 London bombings. And it was an act settled on by 22-year-old Hashem Abedi for revenging his fellow Muslims on the United States-led intervention in the Syrian civil war. Salman's kid brother, Hashem Abedi, aged 20, helped Salman both plan and prepare the atrocity, which, as their sister later revealed, was also to get his own back on a Manchester gang who, in 2016, ran over and then stabbed to death a boy by the name of Abdul Wahab Hafida, who was a friend of both brothers. After the Manchester Arena attack, police discovered that the two brothers had participated in the Libyan civil war and had met with members of Al-Qaeda. Salman's thorough research and preparation for his deadly attack included a trip to Libya, his country of origin, a few days before the attack, where it's believed that the man trained in bomb making. Salman had gone there with his brother Hashem, and Hashem remained there when Salman returned to the UK to fulfil his terror plot. On returning on the 18th of May 2017 to the UK, in furtherance of that terror plot, Salman made as many as 3 reconnaissance visits to Manchester Arena. At 8:30 p.m. on the 22nd of May 2017, Salman was in the Should Hill interchange at the Manchester Arena with a bag carrying the IED, improvised explosive device, that he had built. Moments later, the man went over to the city room. At 12 minutes past 10, a member of the public stopped Salman and asked what he had in his bag, fearful as he was that Salman was carrying a bomb. When Salman didn't answer him, he reported Salman to the police at the venue and was told that they were already aware of Salman. 19 minutes later, however, at 10:31 p.m, when the concert finished and people started leaving, from the city room, Salman detonated his IED. As well as the 22 people that the man killed, 239 others were left injured. Salman's kid brother Hashem was picked up by Libyan security forces on the 23rd of May, the very day after the bombing. After being extradited to the UK and then charged with murder, attempted murder and conspiracy to cause an explosion, in March 2020 the man was found guilty of 22 counts of murder. The terrorist, having helped his brother, who was dead, as you might have imagined, because it was a suicide bomb, both sourced the materials used in the IED and then built the thing. Having been too young for a whole life order, life without parole, in August 2020, Hashem got the longest sentence ever imposed by a British court, 55 years. That sentence, though, has since changed. What many of us may not have known when we heard of the attack from the 12th of April 2025 on 3 prison guards at HMP Frankland, County Durham, by terrorist mass murderer Hashem Abedi was that, where assaulting prison staff is concerned, that wasn't the 28-year-old's first rodeo, so to speak. For reasons that as yet remain unclear, on the said date, Abedi threw boiling hot cooking oil on 3 prison guards, one of which being a woman, before stabbing the 3 officers with a makeshift knife. While the woman guard was discharged from hospital later that day, the other 2 guards were kept in for treatment of the serious burn and stab wounds that they had sustained. Meanwhile, back in May 2020, alongside fellow convicted terrorists Ahmed Hassan and Mohammed Saeed, the killer stormed the office of HMP Belmarsh prison guard Paul Edwards, aged 57, and whacked him with an office chair. After the man fell to the floor, the three attackers viciously kicked and punched him again and again. As well as suffering lacerations to his scalp, Mr. Edwards was left with a bruised back and rib cage, along with lasting damage to his hearing. As to why Abedi and his two accomplices did what they did to Mr. Edwards, it transpired that, sometime before their attack on the guard, Abedi and Hassan had been moved from the prison's standard privileges regime to a basic one, clearly inferior standard, because they had changed their appearance without permission, shaving their heads having been how. As a result of this, the two forfeited their access to televisions and game consoles and had their exercise sessions shortened, these restrictions being, naturally, what a prisoner gets in a basic regime. As you've probably already guessed, Mr. Edwards was the officer who downgraded the two men's regime. As a result of Abedi's attack on the prison guard Mr. Edwards, he was moved to HMP Frankland. However, 4 days after his subsequent attack on prison guards at HMP Frankland, the man was moved back to HMP Belmarsh, since that was the only prison in the country with a highly controlled suite cell, that's SUITE, available. A suite cell is a standalone self-contained unit which is monitored by a minimum of 5 people plus a dog at any one time. There are only 4 such cells across England and Wales. Belmarsh, meanwhile, is considered the most high-security prison in the UK. Hashim's trial for his attack on staff at HMP Frankland was, at the time of this recording, set for January 2027. For his attack on a prison officer at HMP Belmarsh in 2020, meanwhile, he got 3 years and 10 months to run consecutively to his 55-year term. With the life sentence that I personally expect him to get for his Frankland attack, the man will most certainly, or most probably anyway, be locked up for the rest of his life. Our next antagonist said that he could resurrect his murder victim if the authorities would send him into space. He's at the original Monsters Mansion, HMP Wakefield. In late 2025, inside a single month, HMP Wakefield had 2 murders, that of pop star turned PDF file Ian Watkins, who used to be the lead singer of The Lost Prophets, and that of child killer Kyle Bevan. HMP Wakefield, for your information, is one of the 2 UK prisons also known as Monsters Mansion. Monsters like Roy Whiting and Mark Bridger, also 2 child killers, are residents of HMP Wakefield, and they've both been attacked multiple times. And sure enough, child killer Deividas Skebas hasn't escaped a bashing during his stay at the prison. To clarify though, I've got no praise whatsoever for inmates who attack other inmates. This is 26-year-old Deividas Skebas from Boston in Lincolnshire buying a paring knife from a Wilko on the 26th of July 2022, which, 2 days on, he uses to stab to death 9-year-old Lilia Valutite. In court, Skebas admitted killing Lilia but denied murdering her on grounds of diminished responsibility on his part. On the 5th of July 2025, however, at Lincoln Crown Court, he was convicted of murder. On the date in question, Lilia had been playing with a hula hoop with a friend outside her mother's embroidery shop on Fountain Lane. Just after 18:20 p.m. on the day, the pair were approached by Skebas, who reached out and stabbed Lilia once in the chest. Lilia's mother, Lena Savike, remembers hearing Lilia call her name before she rushed into the street to see her daughter still clutching the hoop and moments later collapsing into her arms. The court heard that despite the efforts of an off-duty police officer and doctors and paramedics, Lilia died within an hour of being stabbed. Skebas, who had no connection to Lilia, was arrested at his home 2 days after the attack, and the paring knife with which he'd stabbed Lilia was found behind a radiator.
One of you 2, hold here. Yeah. Send him towards right side. Right, contact, call him. Right, you 2 are going to call him there.
Yeah. Go that way. From here. Hands on the door. Hands on the car.
Have some control over him.
Thank you. Right, you're under arrest, okay, on suspicion of murder.
When the man was arrested for Lilia's murder, he told them that he could bring Lilia back to life if the police would only contact NASA. He was insistent that the US space agency that I've just referenced could enable him to bring Lilia back to life. He also said that he'd been brainwashed and that he was being controlled by a microchip given to him in a piece of rice over in Norway. Initially, the man was held at HMP Wakefield, but quite soon after he arrived, he got a horrific bashing by other inmates and had to be airlifted to hospital. After that, he was declared unfit to stand trial anyway and was sent over to Rampton Hospital, a secure psychiatric unit that houses a lot of our criminally insane murderers. In July 2023, a jury found Skebas carried out the act of killing Lilia, and 2 years later, following an improvement in his mental health, it was decided that he could face a murder trial. After doing what he did to Lilia, the man was assessed by 3 psychiatrists. They all agreed that the man had schizophrenia and that he was showing symptoms of psychosis on the day that he killed Lilia. However, the prosecution rejected Skebas' claims of diminished responsibility and alleged that the killing was deliberate and planned, because after all, he bought a knife deliberately 2 days beforehand. So it was a conscious and intentional act, not something he did in a moment of madness due to mental sickness. Prosecutor Christopher Donnellan KC told the court it was a wicked act, adding that Skebas knew that he was killing a child. The prosecution also made the point that in the build-up to the murderous attack, Skebas waited until there were no witnesses or anyone to stop him doing what he was doing. Moreover, straight after the attack, he went straight home and altered his appearance, changing his clothes and shaving off his beard. He then contacted family members to try and secure loans to pay for transport out of the country to his native Lithuania. The jury found Skebas guilty, as I say, of Lilia's murder by an 11-1 majority verdict after deliberating for more than 7 hours. On the 25th of February 2026, the man got life with a minimum of 25 years. He was then, however, sent back to Rampton Hospital to start his sentence because he still has important mental health issues. However, the idea is that if and when his mental health issues improve sufficiently, he will be sent to prison. It's unlikely that he'll be sent back to Wakefield, but there's still Belmarsh or Frankland. Frankland, in fact, the other British prison known as Monsters Mansion, being our next stop. At HMP Frankland, one of the 2 UK prisons known as Monsters Mansion, as I've just said, if you're not careful, you get your skull split in half in the recycling workshop. Ask Surrey murderer Ian Huntley. Of course, if you're a colossus like Gary Vinter, instead of having, say, triple murderer Anthony Russell wallop you on the head with a spiked metal pole when you least expect it, you beat the crap out of your fellow inmates instead. Standing all of 6 foot 7 inches tall, Gary Vinter is a mountain of a man. He's also a double murderer, his first murder having come in August 1995, the victim having been a young man by the name of Carl Eden. Carl and Vinter were work colleagues, but I've got no idea why Vinter killed Carl. Vinter did 10 years for that murder and then came out on life licence, and then 2.5 years after that, he chased his estranged wife, Anne White, into her kitchen and stabbed her to death. As a result of that second murder of his, he got a whole life order. He'll never be released. In 2012, Vinter sharpened a toilet brush handle and jammed it into the eye of child killer Roy Whiting. Roy Whiting has suffered numerous attacks while he's been in prison, but he's always survived. And on that note, he made a full recovery after what Vinter did to him and also chose not to press charges against Vinter. Vinter said he did what he did to Whiting because Whiting is a, quote, dirty little nonce, unquote. In November 2014, Vinter nearly kicked another prisoner to death. That prisoner was Lee Newell, who, like Vinter, at that point had committed 2 murders, one of which having come in prison, and had, like Vinter, received a whole life order because of that second murder. Vinter did what he did to Newell because he'd asked for a transfer to a prison with better gym facilities, and it wasn't happening. Newell was left with permanent damage as a result of that vicious beating that he got from Vinter, and amongst that damage is the fact that he lost the sight in one eye, and he was awarded £85,000 compensation. Despite being blind in one eye, despite being in his mid-50s, and despite having already committed 2 murders, one of which having come in prison, as at the time of this recording, the man was facing his 3rd murder charge for the murder of Kyle Bevan, a child killer at HMP Wakefield. That murder came less than a month after the murder of Ian Watkins that took place in the same prison. There are 2 other men who were charged with Bevan's murder alongside Newell, Mark Fellows and David Taylor. All I can find out about David Taylor is that he was already a murderer. As for Lee Newell and Mark Fellows, I tell their story in some detail in more than one other video. I will link one of those videos in the description box below. Unlike Whiting, Lee Newell pressed charges against Vinter for what Vinter did to him, and Vinter's solicitor argued in Vinter's defence that because Vinter is banged up forever with no hope of ever getting out, he's got no incentive to behave and refrain from violence. And I'll just make the point there that the solicitor was clearly being crass. Vinter was given a chance at living as a free person and abstaining from violence, and he blew it, so he's only got himself to blame for the position that he's in now. He did get another life sentence with a minimum term of 18 years for what he did to Newell, but as we can all see, and as the judge said to him, it doesn't even matter because you were never getting out anyway. Our next antagonist is at HMP Low Newton, which is full of women who are just as evil and murderous as her. Rose West, Joanna Dennehy and Lucy Letby, with an asterisk to her name, have no fewer than 21 murders between them. 7 to Lucy Letby, 11 to Rose West and 3 to Joanna Dennehy. And yes, at one point they were all at HMP Low Newton, but Letby and Rose West are no longer there, but Joanna Dennehy still is, and she's still as dangerous as ever, I hear. Those 3 are the only 3 women in the country doing a whole life order, but in my opinion, Lucy Letby is completely innocent. We'll leave that debate for another time. As for Tracey Connelly, Peter Connelly, known also as Baby P, lived from the 1st of March 2006 to the 3rd of August 2007. He was then 17 months old when he was killed after suffering more than 50 injuries over an 8-month period, during which he was repeatedly seen by the London Borough of Haringey Children's Services and National Health Services professionals. Peter's mother, Tracey Connelly, her partner, Stephen Barker, and Jason Owen, later revealed to be Barker's brother, were all convicted of causing or allowing the death of a child. Connelly having pleaded guilty to the charge and having then been sent to HMP Low Newton.
Stephen Barker had a history of sadism, of torturing both people and animals. Abused and brutalised himself as a boy, Barker developed into a classic bully. He had a fascination for Hitler and kept a collection of Nazi memorabilia, including helmets and daggers. Tracey Connelly knew how to work the system. She grew up around social services. Her mother suffered from drink and drug problems. Her biological father was a sex offender and absent for most of her life. And at 12 years old, Connelly was sent to boarding school for delinquent children. Jason Owen had a long history of deceit. He had previous convictions for theft and arson after setting his home on fire to claim back the money. He was on the run from the authorities with his 15-year-old girlfriend. And although he was bailed following baby Peter's death, he was rearrested after applying for a passport. We can also reveal that the brothers were arrested in the mid-90s over allegations they bullied and assaulted their elderly grandmother at this house in Kent to try to get her to change her will, but the 82-year-old died of pneumonia before her case could be brought to court.
Keeping all that in mind, the murder of 17-month-old Peter Connelly, such as I'm about to present it to you, will now not come in any way as a surprise to you. A few months after Peter Connelly was born, his biological father left. In November of that year, 2006 that is, Tracey Connelly's new boyfriend, Stephen Barker, moved in with her. In December of that year, a GP noticed bruises on Peter's face and chest. His mother, Tracey, was arrested and the baby was put into the care of a family friend. However, he was then returned to his mother's care in January 2007. Over the next few months, Peter was admitted to hospital on 2 occasions, suffering from injuries including bruising, scratching and swelling on the side of the head. Tracey was arrested again in May 2007. In June 2007, a social worker observed marks on Peter and informed the police. A medical examination concluded that the bruising was the result of child abuse. On the 4th of June, the baby was placed with a friend for safeguarding. On the 25th of July, Haringey Council's Children and Young People Service obtained legal advice which indicated that the threshold for initiating care proceedings was not met. On the 1st of August 2007, Peter was seen at St Anne's Hospital in North London by locum paediatrician Zara Aleena. Serious injuries, including a broken back and broken ribs, very likely went undetected, as the post-mortem report believed that those predated the time of the examination of the baby by Dr. Zara Aleena. A day later, Tracey was informed that she wouldn't be prosecuted. The next day, an ambulance was called and Peter was found in his cot. He was blue and he was only wearing a nappy. After attempts at resuscitation, he was taken to North Middlesex Hospital with his mother, but was pronounced dead at 12:20 p.m. A post-mortem revealed that he had swallowed a tooth after being punched. Other injuries included, again, a broken back, broken ribs, mutilated fingertips and missing fingernails. Tracey Connelly was then arrested yet again. On the 11th of November 2008, Owen, aged 36, his brother Barker, aged 32, were convicted of causing or allowing the death of a child or vulnerable person. To remind you, Connelly herself, Tracey Connelly, the baby's mother, had already pleaded guilty, so she didn't go on trial. A second trial, though, took place in April 2009 when Connelly and Barker, under aliases, faced charges related to the rape of a very young girl who had lived for precisely 2 years. The girl was also on Haringey Council's Child Protection Register, just as Peter Connelly had been. Barker was actually found guilty of rape, while Tracey was found not guilty of child cruelty. The sentencing for the 2 trials that I've just described took place together on the 22nd of May 2009 at the Old Bailey. Tracey Connelly got a sentence of indefinite imprisonment for public protection, IPP, which was subject to a minimum term of 5 years. Barker got life for the rape with a minimum sentence of 10 years and a 12-year sentence for his role in the death of Peter Connelly, the 2 to run concurrently. Owen was also jailed indefinitely with a minimum term of 3 years. In addition, the 3 convicts appealed against their sentences. As a result of that appeal, Owen's sentence was changed to a fixed 6-year term and he was released in August 2011 but then got recalled to prison in April 2013. I couldn't find why. Tracey herself was released on licence in 2013, however she too was recalled to prison in 2015 for breaching her licence. In July 2022, Tracey Connelly once again got parole, but she was once again recalled to prison for breaching the licence conditions that she was under, and that happened in September 2024. And as I record this, she's still in prison. So is Barker. He applied for parole in 2017, but didn't get it. Our next antagonist is in arguably Britain's weirdest prison. What have killers Virginia McCullough, Nicholas Prosper, Dennis McGrory, Fiona Beal and Rekha Kumari Baker all got in common? They're all held at HMP Peterborough. It is the country's one and only mixed prison, but of course men and women are housed in completely separate buildings. With Fiona Beal's background, you won't believe what she did and why. On the 19th of March 2022, the partially mummified body of a 42-year-old male was found in a makeshift grave in the garden of a house on Moore Street, Northampton, in England. A post-mortem on the decaying body determined that the cause of his death was a stab wound to the right-hand side of his neck, splitting the right jugular vein and piercing the esophagus and the trachea, the windpipe and the food pipe. With an entry width of 3.7 centimetres and a depth of 6 centimetres, the stab had to have been executed with a substantial degree of force. After careful analysis, the body was eventually confirmed to belong to a local man named Nick Billingham. Nick hadn't been seen since November 2021. Who did this builder and father of one in, and why? 48-year-old primary school teacher Fiona Beal was a well-liked and highly respected teacher at Eastfield Primary Academy in Northampton. Claire Mills, the head teacher, described Fiona as a strong and capable professional whose key strength was her ability to build relationships with children who needed additional support. On the 1st of November 2021, Fiona rang in sick, triggering an absence of more than 10 days. Her claim, however, that both she and her live-in boyfriend of 17 years, a 42-year-old by the name of Nick Billingham, had contracted COVID-19 and were required to self-isolate, turned out to be total codswallop. In the months prior to this point, Nick and Fiona had been undergoing relationship counselling for a multitude of reasons, a particularly important one being Nick's confession to having fathered a child with another woman. On this point, in fact, Nick was a serial cheat, and Fiona had long since become aware of this. Notwithstanding, in this same phase of time, Nick wrote about Fiona as kind-hearted, generous, stating that she was the most beautiful woman in the world. He seemed, moreover, to feel genuine remorse for the said infidelity of his. That said, when, in spring 2020, the pandemic struck, Nick and his girlfriend were both furloughed and, like so many others, they were confined to their home. This triggered constant rowing between the two, relating to matters of sex, money, and just about everything else in between. The very day that Fiona called in sick at work, Nick had been out working on a house renovation, while Fiona herself had stayed at home and smoked a substantial quantity of weed. When her boyfriend returned, she got him to take the hot bath that she had prepared for him, while promising him sexual intimacy afterwards. On finishing his very relaxing bath and entering the bedroom, Nick found his girlfriend draped over the bed waiting for him. After settling himself onto the bed, he happily put on the eye mask that his evidently very horny and, in this moment, delightfully seductive girlfriend offered him. Similarly, he made no objection when Fiona asked him to allow her to tie him to the bed to fulfill a kinky fantasy that had come to her. Trussed to the bed and blindfolded then, Nick had no defence whatsoever against his girlfriend's subsequent act of jabbing the knife that she had been hiding in her dressing gown pocket into his neck with ferocity and rage. In a state of physical agony and mental shock, Nick was no less able to breathe the question, why? Fiona duly explained, like the savage psychopath that she was, that she would never let him hurt another woman again. The minutes that it took Nick to actually die were minutes, as I've said, of sheer agony, his girlfriend, to remind you, having severed his jugular vein. After wrapping Nick's body in a plastic sheet, Fiona dragged the corpse downstairs, damaging the banisters in the process, and then lugged it out into the garden. While she left it in an area that was mainly out of the view of her neighbours, it was no less highly inconvenient for her that her neighbours were undergoing home renovations at the time, which drastically reduced her garden's privacy. All the same, the killer proceeded to dig what can only be described as a makeshift grave made of plastic sheets, badly mixed concrete, breeze blocks and compost. Finding, after using up all those materials, that she hadn't bought enough of them to fill the hole, she promptly headed down to her local B&Q to buy 10 50-litre bags of compost, 10 22.5 kilogram bags of Cotswold stone and a grey plastic trough. On completing Nick's burial, she then painted over his blood spatters, which had been left all over the bedroom. She then rearranged furniture in the living room to block the view of his grave, and then she burned his belongings out in her garden. Nick's blood had seeped into the mattress during the murder, so Fiona dumped the mattress in the basement. Now feeling confident that nobody would suspect that her boyfriend had been murdered in his home by none other than her herself, Fiona embarked on her well-rehearsed cover-up of Nick's disappearance. The second her dead boyfriend's family and friends started asking where Nick was, Fiona told them that he had left her for another woman, a story which, initially at least, the man's family and friends didn't doubt given their knowledge of Nick's infidelity. Fiona reinforced her cover story by sending messages from Nick's phone to his friends and family, pretending to be the man himself and reassuring everyone that he was fine. To add to her sick and deceitful nature, Fiona would invite Nick's very mother around for drinks and tell her stories, all the while Nick's mother's son's decomposing body lay only a few metres away outside. During the months that Fiona spent in her job after returning to it on the 12th of November 2021, nobody noticed any difference in her behaviour. She seemed entirely normal. Shortly after the 8th of March 2022, however, the head of her school, Claire Mills, requested the police to perform a welfare check on Fiona. Having called Fiona's mother and learned that the reason that Fiona had given her for her sudden disappearance was completely different to the reason that she had, on the 8th of March itself, given for that at work, Claire had immediately grown beset with worry. In contradiction to what Fiona had told her mother, you see, Fiona was not away on any residential course that she, Claire, that is, had authorised. It sounded to Claire like the explanation for her absence that Fiona had given her, namely things not quite, quote, being right, unquote, was much closer to the truth. When both Claire and Fiona's mother naturally confronted Fiona about her two stories, which they did over the phone or by some other form of telecommunication because they didn't do it in person, Fiona told them that she was running away. On the 15th of March, police, who had, days earlier, found Fiona's home empty, found the killer holed up in a holiday home in Cumbria. After packing the woman off to hospital in view of the suicide attempt that they rapidly discovered she had made, police found, in their search of the cabin where she'd been staying, an extremely concerning journal. In this piece of writing, Fiona confessed her appalling act against her former boyfriend, saying, quote, "He spat on me and threatened me during sex. The things he said and did fueled my dark side. I call her Tulip 22. She's reckless, fearless and efficient. Ruthless. I started plotting as Tulip 22 after he'd gone to bed. November the 1st. I'd smoked all day. While he was in the bath, I kept the knife in my dressing gown pocket and then hid it in the drawer next to the bed. Hiding his body was bad. Moving a body is much more difficult than it looks on TV." Unquote. As you might imagine, this piece of writing soon led police to Nick Billingham's improvised grave situated in his girlfriend's very back garden. After changing her initial not guilty plea to the charge of murder to guilty, on the 30th of May 2024, Fiona Beal got life with a minimum of 20 years. Our next killer is at HMP Full Sutton, which is only a slightly less notorious place than Frankland, Belmarsh and Wakefield. And hey, he thoroughly belongs there. Having been locked up for the offence of armed robbery, Damien Fowkes has long since gained a reputation in prison for being a no-nonsense punisher. Where he can, he hurts fellow inmates who have hurt children. Around 2011, he got 20 years added to his sentence for slashing the throat of double child killer Ian Huntley in HMP Frankland. That act of his put Huntley in hospital. And in that act of his, attempted murder in other words, Fowkes used a homemade weapon on Huntley while Huntley was working, quite ironically, on the healthcare wing of the prison. For essaying a number of boys between 1991 and 1992, Colin Hatch did less than 2 years. On getting out, he promptly went and committed, in January 1994, the S-bleep-ually motivated murder of 7-year-old Sean Williams. In exchange, in 2011, Fowkes barricaded himself and Hatch into a cell on D Wing at HMP Full Sutton and told prison officers that he wouldn't kill Hatch as long as the prison officers stayed outside. The officers dealt with the matter as a hostage situation, but Fowkes did kill Hatch. He strangled him using strips of bedding as ligatures. Before killing him, Fowkes had told the prison officers, quote, "He's a nonce. he doesn't deserve to live. And then he said after that child offenders, quote, just do my head in. It was the same when I did Huntley, unquote. The man was convicted not of murder though, but of manslaughter. It was somehow then successfully argued in court that Fowkes never meant to kill Hatch. Of course, in October 2016, over in HMP Whitemoor in Cambridgeshire, Fowkes himself nearly died when 49-year-old Kevin McCarthy slit his throat. This happened when McCarthy grabbed Fowkes from behind and cut his throat with a homemade blade while lunch was being prepared on the day in question, the 2nd of October 2016. There was no clear motive for the violent assault, but some prisoners had complained about McCarthy not taking his turn to clean the kitchen earlier that morning. This was the third time that McCarthy had tried to murder a prisoner, the man having been locked up for attempted murder and having convictions stretching back to 1990. Our next antagonist did the unthinkable to his own baby daughter. He's at HMP Long Lartin, where he's in the enviable company, for instance, of the Suffolk Strangler, Steve Wright. In April 2021, Thomas Holford, then aged 20, was looking after his 5-week-old daughter, Everly, all by himself, exactly as he had done a few nights before without a hitch. The act of shaking that the young father perpetrated against his baby daughter on his second occasion of looking after her all by himself caused the baby severe and irreversible brain injuries. 13 months later, as a result of those brain injuries, Everly died. Everly Jude Luna Stroud was born on the 13th of March 2021 to 16-year-old Casey and her 20-year-old boyfriend, Thomas Holford. Having been welcomed into Casey's home in Margate in Kent, South East England, by Casey's parents, Kelly and Lewis, in early 2020, COVID time, Holford showed, while his girlfriend was pregnant, his excitement about his upcoming fatherhood. Furthermore, there are text messages plus a GP referral to show the young man's determination to reduce his cannabis smoking in preparation for fatherhood. Once Everly and her mother came home after the baby's birth, Holford took charge, mainly, of the night feeds. The midwife and the community nurse could both testify that both the baby's parents were handling their daughter correctly and confidently, supporting her head appropriately at all times. Having successfully looked after Everly all on his own overnight from the 14th to the 15th of April 2021, on the 20th of April 2021, Holford was once again in sole charge of his daughter, Casey having gone on a birthday eve sleepover at a friend's house as she was turning 17 the following day. By 10:39 p.m, Kelly and Lewis had gone to bed, leaving Holford alone with Everly in his room. The next morning, on returning home around 9 a.m, Casey came to the bedroom and found Everly markedly grey and extremely cold. There was an obvious bruise in the shape of a fingertip on the baby's cheek, and the baby's eyes were swollen. Everly was moaning and whimpering, her breathing intermittent and scary. When Casey and her mother woke Holford up and asked what had happened to the baby, Holford's response was to snap at them. Minutes later, an ambulance team arrived and immediately actioned Everly's rapid treatment and transfer to the A&E department at Queen Elizabeth the Queen Mother Hospital in Margate. Later that day, the baby was transferred by air ambulance to King's College Hospital in London. At the two hospitals, Everly had a series of emergency treatments, assessments and scans which showed that she had been grabbed around the ribs and violently shaken over a sustained period of time. This repeated act of violence caused her brain to move and her feet to flail, the resultant damage to her brain, legs, ribs and eyes being nothing short of immense. The fingertip bruising to the baby's face was caused by her having had her jaw gripped with brute force. It's not clear what Holford pushed into his baby daughter's back way, let's say, but whatever he pushed into it, it caused 3 tears in the skin of that opening.
Sorry to have to do this, but we've had an update from the hospital and they've said that the injuries that she's got to her face looks like it's been done by a person. And obviously the only person that was in with her was yourself.
Yeah.
It's only on suspicion, but at the moment, the time is 12:05, I'm arresting you on suspicion of child neglect and GBH. You do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defence if you do not mention one question, something which you later learn in court. Anything you do say may be given in evidence.
From June 2021, Everly was under the care of a specialist foster mum, all the while having regular hospital stays, a team of nurses, doctors and therapists treating her and supporting both the foster mum and Casey. Nothing could bring the baby back from her vegetative state, however, Everly having gone blind as a result of her eye injuries long before her death, which came on the 27th of May 2022. She succumbed at 14 months to a chest infection linked to her brain injuries. When, on being discovered by her mother barely conscious and making no meaningful movement, Everly was rushed to hospital, her father sat in the hospital downloading games, even asking a police officer to help him choose a game. Having smoked cannabis on a daily basis since the age of 16, Holford had failed his mission to reduce his consumption of the drug, going back to his daily use of it on the 15th of April 2021. He was aware when, in the afternoon of the 20th of April, he went out with his mate and smoked the drug with them, that he would be caring for his daughter alone that evening, but he did what he did anyway. His reason for seeking a higher quantity of the drug than normal on that day, in fact, was that the 20th of April is none other than a celebration day for so-called stoners. At 7:45 p.m, the antagonist texted his dealer, a man called Milo, trying to strap some cannabis from him, meaning getting it on credit, even if it was, quote, dust, unquote, because, quote, I've got the little one on my own tonight, gonna be effing stressful, unquote. When Milo asked for payment up front, Holford tricked Kelly, his girlfriend's mother, into transferring him some money online by saying it was for a birthday present for Casey. The morning after, police found in Holford's room a bunch of smoked cigarette butts on the desk where Everly was sleeping, as well as a bag of herbal cannabis with a grinder next to one of Everly's bottles. Holford had, the night before, wanted his 5-week-old baby daughter to stop crying. He picked her up and shook her to death because he was stoned on cannabis. On the 4th of July 2025 at Canterbury Crown Court, he got life with a minimum of 16 years, which, in December 2025, was increased following an appeal under the unduly lenient scheme to 18 years. Getting your son to dig up his mother's body after you've killed her to set up a proof of life subterfuge. No, I'm not talking about a Hollywood picture. I'm talking about Andrew Griggs. He is at HMP Dovegate and he may well be there until he dies. The murder of Debbie Griggs is an example of a murder for which somebody is convicted, even though the victim's body hasn't been found. The body was eventually found, but it came after the person who killed her was convicted. Debbie Griggs, who came from Deal in Kent, South East England, was 34 years old when she was murdered by her husband, Andrew Griggs. At the point when Andrew murdered Debbie, the couple had 3 little kids, all boys, ages 6, 4 and 18 months, and Debbie was 4.5 months pregnant. The couple worked for the business owned by Andrew's family, which was frozen food. Debbie was part-time as she was at home with her boys. While Andrew was full-time, even on evenings and weekends when he could have been looking after his boys so that his wife could have a rest, he hardly ever did so. Instead, he usually went out with his mates, and he was also shagging a 14-year-old girl on the side. We'll call that girl Amanda. Andrew's sordid affair with Amanda, a schoolgirl, was the source of much of the arguing that used to take place between Andrew and Debbie. Debbie once openly confronted both Andrew and Amanda about sleeping together, but they both denied it. Andrew and Debbie soon started heading for divorce. On 2 occasions they had a physical fight. At one point, Debbie took the business checkbooks away in order to have financial control over the business, having no idea that her husband had closed their joint account, which the checkbooks in her possession would have served, and was opening a new account in his sole name. After seeing a solicitor about divorcing Debbie though, Andrew went to his wife and persuaded her to give their marriage another go. Despite everything that Andrew had done to her, you see, Debbie still loved the man. Andrew didn't love her though, his act of getting her to take him back coming from his not wanting to forfeit the sizable share of the business that he would have had to forfeit to his wife if they got divorced. He had been advised on that point, you see, when he went to see a solicitor. The man was also still sleeping with Amanda, despite having promised his wife not to see the girl anymore. In the early hours of the 5th of May 1999, Andrew murdered Debbie and then drove her body away in her own car, a Peugeot, before abandoning the car and coming back home. Later that evening, the man telephoned the police to report his wife missing, giving them the story that the two had had an argument, in the course of which Debbie had said, "Right, you see what it's like looking after 3 little boys all by yourself, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week." And then she'd walked out, got into her car and driven away. Nobody who knew Debbie believed that story for a minute though, Andrew having duly started using that same story with his own family and with Debbie's, because Debbie was a devoted and doting mother. No way would she have just walked out on her little boys, especially given that at the point when she apparently walked out, she was 4.5 months pregnant. About a week later, Debbie's car was discovered. Before dumping it, Andrew had taken the precaution of removing whether the carpet or the boot liner, which carried some of Debbie's blood. However, some of her blood was found elsewhere in the car, and that was a crucial piece of circumstantial evidence in Andrew's murder trial that came several years later, at which point Andrew and his boys were living in Dorset in the southwest of England. In October 2019, Andrew was convicted of Debbie's murder and got life with a minimum of 20 years. I'm under the impression that the man was finally caught as a result of a standard cold case review, in which compelling evidence against him was finally found, including the evidence held in Debbie's car that I mentioned just now. The story, though, doesn't end there. At one point after he was convicted, Andrew asked one of his sons, who we'll call Ricky, to dig up Debbie's dead body, which was buried under a garden shed in the family home, cut off a lock of the hair, go abroad and send it into the UK from abroad so that it could serve as proof that Debbie was still alive. As well as triggering our disgust and our shock, it makes us see that the man must have told Ricky what he'd done to the lad's mother. And then it must be that Ricky, despite the horror and the shock and the upset that that news must have caused him, no less pledged loyalty to his father. Or did the lad fall for the cock and bull story that his father came up with in explanation of how his, Ricky's, mother's body came to be buried under the patio in the garden of the family home? Andrew claimed, you see, that he found Debbie's body inside a container in someone else's garden around 2 years after he had reported her missing. He said he panicked and encased the container in fiberglass before someone else buried it, and although he suspected it was beneath his garden shed, he didn't know for sure. Yeah, I know. In any event, Ricky didn't follow his dad's instructions. Rather, after police dug up the patio in 2022 and found Debbie's remains, in 2025, Andrew got 3 years added to his sentence for perverting the course of justice. He'd got life, to remind you, with a minimum term of 20 years. By the time the man becomes eligible for parole, he'll be 78. Our next antagonist is our second Wakefield prison monster, who thought his children were inflammable.
I've actually been down to our home, and what we saw, we just cannot believe it.
Mick Philpott and his wife Mairead, the couple that we're watching, aren't shedding a single tear. Their tissues are no more than props, and the man's tone is calm and matter of fact, no emotion whatsoever to it. Mairead keeps her head down most of the time as well because, as is doubtless, that gives her less acting to do. On the 11th of May 2012, a few days before they held this press conference, together with a family friend by the name of Paul Mosley, Philpott and Mairead set the fire to their home, which claimed the lives of their 6 children and which earned them this travesty of a press conference. Philpott was behind the whole plot. His reason for his act was demented, and in 2025 he got a good hiding from another inmate. Philpott's prior criminal convictions were all for serious acts of violence against his previous girlfriends. There was an occasion in the late 70s when the man was in his late teens to early 20s when he shot his then girlfriend Kim Hill with a crossbow. On another occasion he cracked her kneecap with a hammer. Then in July 1978 he stabbed her repeatedly in her sleep before turning the knife on her mother when she came to her daughter's rescue. Philpott's violence was an ongoing behaviour in all his subsequent relationships. When, in 2000, aged 44, he met Mairead Duffy, a 19-year-old single mother, the man had 5 children from 2 women. By 2006, he had another 7, 4 coming from Mairead, the 2 having got married in 2003, and 3 coming from Lisa Willis, his 21-year-old live-in side chick, who, when Philpott moved her into his home, was a 16-year-old single mother. By early 2012, together with Mairead and Lisa's respective pre-Philpott child, the family's 3-bed home in Derby, East Midlands, had 11 children and 3 adults all living there, and somewhere along the way, Philpott had another 6 kids. When, in 2006, Philpott went on the Jeremy Kyle show, he boasted of his unique family setup and proudly proclaimed to live wholly off benefits. For her own part, Mairead hated sharing her husband, but given the man's violent ways, she was too scared to do anything about the situation. Lisa's own act from February 2012, in contrast, of leaving Philpott and taking her children with her, was a crushing blow to the man. His women were his slaves, his children were his property, and they weren't allowed as such to leave him. He thought that by starting a fire in his home, he could convince the police that Lisa was behind it, in line with her alleged repeat threats to do one such thing, Philpott having reported those alleged threats to the police. This would get the man his kids back, since his prior, more normal attempts to get both Lisa and the kids back had failed. The rapid spread of the fire that he, Mairead and Mosley started in their home late on the 11th of May 2012 though, along with the unexpected suffocating smoke, prevented Philpott from fulfilling his plan of rescuing, by means of a ladder, the 6 children that he had at home. The 6 children, aged from 5 to 13, died from smoke inhalation. After doing half of his 17-year sentence for manslaughter and then getting out, in October 2025, at the age of 58, Mosley died from a heart attack. Mairead also got out after doing half of her 17 years and is now living a quiet life by all accounts. As at the time of this recording, Philpott has got around 2 years of his 15 years to do, and he got a taste of his own violent medicine when, in March 2025, a fellow inmate of his at HMP Wakefield approached him from behind and whacked him over the head with a metal container of some kind. I've got no idea why the person attacked him, but Philpott, who was 68 at the time, must know that it could happen again and again. We're now taking a trip to HMP Strangeways to meet quadruple killer Dale Cregan. Not that murder usually comes with unacceptable reason, generally speaking, but the 4 murders committed by Dale Cregan literally came from nothing. Coming from Manchester, in May 2012 he murdered 23-year-old Mark Short over something really petty that started in a pub, and then in August 2012 he murdered the father of Mark Short, David Short, who was aged 46. When the coppers started questioning him and his family about the 2 murders, the man decided to play a rather nasty trick on them. Fiona Beal, 32, and Nicola Hughes, 23, were out on a routine patrol on the 18th of September 2012 when they were sent to Abbey Gardens in Hattersley, Tameside in Greater Manchester. This was at about 11 a.m. and it was in response to a report of criminal damage. Someone had phoned up and said that some random person had thrown a pavement slab through their window. The person making that call was, of course, Dale Cregan, who was already known to the police as a gangster, and this was well before he was suspected of being behind the murders of the Shorts. But of course, the person taking the call didn't know who it was at the time.
Police emergency.
Someone just threw a big concrete slab through my back window and ran off.
Of the house or a car? What are we talking?
No, sorry, in my back window in the house.
In the house. What's the address there, please?
30 Abbey Gardens, Mosham.
Did you see them?
Seen one, yeah.
Do you know them?
No, I don't know.
Okay. Do you know why they've done it?
I haven't got a clue.
Okay. Is it a rear window, did you say?
Yeah, it's in the back garden.
So it's just happened prior to your ringing, has it, yeah?
Yeah.
And it's a piece of concrete, yeah?
Yeah, it's a piece of concrete at the corner of a paving stone.
Your name, please?
Adam.
What's your second name, Adam?
Archery. Oh.
You sound as bad as I do.
Yeah.
It's recording, yeah. So, right, I'll get an officer up there, have a look round, see if they can see anybody similar, and then they'll come and see you. All right, Adam?
How long would it take? Do you know roughly? I know that it's not that serious. But...
Well, because it's just happened, it's gone in on the priority, so that's within the hour, certainly. But
okay.
They'll try and get up there as soon as, if there's a possibility he's still knocking about.
All right then, thanks very much.
Okay.
I'll wait. I'll be waiting.
All right, Adam.
All right,
bye. Bye.
When Miss Bone and Miss Hughes turned up to Cregan's home, he opened fire on them, he shot at them, he threw a grenade at them. Fiona Bone died at the scene, while Nicola Hughes was badly wounded and died later in hospital. To clarify why Cregan did what he did, he said that it was because the police had been hounding his family. They had been questioning both Cregan and his family, as I mentioned earlier, in connection to the murder of the Shorts. About an hour after doing what he did to Nicola Hughes and Fiona Bone, Cregan went and handed himself in to the police and told them what he'd done. Paradoxically though, a few weeks later, he pleaded not guilty to the murders of those two police officers. But then in February 2013 in court, he changed his plea from not guilty to guilty. And likewise in May 2013, he pleaded guilty to the murders of father and son, David and Mark Short. In June 2013, Cregan got his whole life order for the 4 murders of which he'd been convicted. HMP Low Newton, a women's prison, is where we'll meet triple murderer Joanna Dennehy, whose story is full of unbelievable shocks and twists.
Looks good.
Thanks, Matt. That makes me feel so good. Real sexy.
This woman has just been arrested on suspicion of 3 murders and 2 attempted murders, and yet she's laughing and flirting with police officers, acting as if she's just been arrested for something like stealing a charger.
Not a t-shirt, it's a tent.
Joanne, signature from you that we've got your property.
Right, so what am I out for? Attempted murder and murder.
You've been arrested on suspicion of attempted murder and murder.
Attempted murder and murder, something. So going down for Sunday Road. Excuse me.
This is, of course, the second of the 2 women whole lifers that I'm presenting to you, and 2, as I say, of the only 3 women doing a whole life order in the UK. This woman's story will leave you flabbergasted. The 3 men that Joanna Dennehy murdered in March 2013 were none other than her friends, her sexual partners to be exact. When she was little, Joanna Dennehy was a very kind, caring, sensitive girl, very close to her sister. She was a very academically gifted pupil who had aspirations of becoming a lawyer, until one day in her teens, for reasons that people just can't explain, she changed. She got into drugs, she got into drink, she got into sex. She ran off with a bloke who was a lot older than her that she came onto, had a couple of babies with him. Then that relationship broke down. She went to prison, came out, got in with some really, really dodgy characters, and then in March 2013 killed 3 people and tried to kill another 2. She said that the reason she did it is because she wanted to see if she was as evil and as cold-hearted as she thought she was, and that after she killed the first person, she had to keep going. It was moreish and she couldn't get enough. She was convicted in 2014 along with the 3 men, her so-called undertakers that had helped her, in particular by getting rid of the bodies. And in fact, Joanna Dennehy's killings were known as the Peterborough ditch murders because they dumped the bodies in a ditch out in Peterborough in Cambridgeshire. The 3 accomplices were given finite terms, and I think at least one of them has since been released. Dennehy herself got her whole life order in 2014. While she was on remand before the trial, Dennehy was housed in segregation at HMP Bronzefield, a Category A prison in Surrey, South East England. Prison staff found an escape plot in her diary at this point, which involved killing or seriously injuring a prison officer, cutting off one of the officer's fingers and using the amputated finger to fool the biometric system in the prison. Because of the plot, Dennehy was placed in solitary confinement from September 2013 to September 2015. She claimed that her isolation left her tearful and upset and led her to self-harm. In 2018, the woman requested permission to marry her cellmate, Hayley Palmer, much to the dismay of Palmer's family, who feared that Dennehy might endanger her. In 2018, both Dennehy and Palmer tried to kill themselves in a suicide pact but failed. In June 2020, Dennehy was reported to be in a relationship with another prisoner, Emma Aitken, a 25-year-old who was serving a 12-year sentence for her part in the murder of a man whose body was dumped outside a social club. In May 2021, it was again reported that Dennehy and Palmer, the latter having since been released from her sentence, which was for robbery, intended to get married. In 2019, Dennehy was moved to Low Newton prison in County Durham. On her arrival, she allegedly threatened to kill Rosemary West, the UK's only other female whole-life order prisoner besides Joanna Dennehy and Lucy Letby. As a result, West, who, as I record this, is receiving end-of-life care, was moved to another prison. The government, though, denied that Dennehy had threatened to kill the woman. Rose West is presented later in this video, and when it comes to sheer evil, she easily beats Joanna Dennehy. We're off to HMP Frankland now, Monsters Mansion 2, to meet a serial predator who has inexplicably escaped a whole life prison sentence. 18-year-old trainee hairdresser and aspiring model Sally-Anne Bowman was at her very front door when, on the 18th of September 2005, someone approached her, stabbed her 3 times in the neck and twice in the stomach, and then, as she lay dead or dying, raped her. While raping her, the attacker bit her 4 times, leaving teeth marks on her neck and breast. He then inserted lumps of concrete into her mouth and into her genitalia and left other pieces in a line along her thigh. Sally-Anne was the last in a long line of women who had suffered the most horrific and depraved violence from 35-year-old Mark Dixie. Of the man's numerous attacks on women, one had come only minutes before the man's attack on Sally-Anne Bowman. Mark Dixie was born in Streatham, South London in 1970. The circumstances under which he was, at some point after the age of 8, placed into a children's home remain unknown. So are the details of Dixie's schooling. What is known is that at 16, Dixie held a knife to a woman's throat in Stockwell, South London. He then fondled her breasts and stole her money and then fled. By this point, the youth was smoking cannabis on a regular basis, but it's not clear that this had anything to do with the crime of his that I've just described. The 6 weeks in prison that Dixie got for that offence, however, were arguably unduly lenient and taught the youth to have no fear of consequences. What Dixie was convicted of in 1987 was 2 robberies. What went unsolved for decades, though, was the 1987 rape of a woman in an abandoned car park in South London. The attacker had left the woman bound to her car, as well as gagged, and then set the car on fire before taking flight. The woman luckily managed to escape, but her ordeal wasn't over. Having stolen the woman's credit card details, later that evening, the attacker, Mark Dixie, who at this point was still 16 years of age, called the woman's home and taunted her about what he'd done to her. The following evening, he did the same. Having subsequently moved to the countryside to be as isolated as possible, which was owing, of course, to the overwhelming trauma that Dixie's actions had caused her, in 2017, exactly 30 years after the attack, the victim finally saw justice, as I'll be showing. In 1988, Dixie was given 2 years probation for 1 charge of indecent assault and 2 charges of indecent exposure. Dixie had exposed himself to women and baited in front of them. Dixie was to repeat those same offences again and again. Later in 1988, Dixie was jailed for 6 months for indecent assault and actual bodily harm. In 1989, he got community service for indecent exposure. In 1990, he was convicted of assaulting a police officer. And yet, having done all this offending, which includes a number of violent crimes, Dixie had only spent a total of 7.5 months in prison. Once again then, the young man had learned that the law is soft. Police in Australia believe that Dixie committed a number of offences in that country, other than the one that feels like a rehearsal for Sally-Anne Bowman's murder. After breaking into the home of a 19-year-old female student from Thailand, Dixie stabbed her 8 times in the back, and then, once she fell unconscious, he raped her. The woman later testified against Dixie at his murder trial, her having survived the man's attack being nothing less than a miracle. Later that year, 1999, Dixie was fined $750 and then deported back to the UK. This followed another act of indecent exposure from him, in which, after seeing a young woman running along the road near Bunbury, Dixie had stopped his car somewhere ahead. Shortly after, the woman found a man jumping out of a bush stark naked and asking her to perform a sexual act. And if you're not getting Wayne Couzens vibes here, I am. The man thingy baiting in front of a woman while she was in a phone box in Purley in London in 2001 was Mark Dixie. The woman that Dixie hit on the head with a chef's iron and then dragged to an isolated spot in a road in South London in 2002 before indecently assaulting her suffered multiple skull injuries. Before taking flight, as he did when a neighbour came out and scared him off, Dixie snatched the woman's phone. On this occasion, it was the victim's boyfriend that Dixie called to brag about what he'd done. In 2017, Romano van der Dussen, a Dutch national, attended Dixie's murder trial. During his 12 years in prison for a rape and 2 acts of SA, Romano had frequently been beaten up by other inmates. Romano, you see, was convicted of 3 sex attacks that took place in the Costa del Sol in Spain around 2003 because he looked like Dixie, even though his DNA wasn't found anywhere in any of the 3 cases. Dixie eventually confessed to the rape alone. In the early hours of the 25th of September 2005, around 14 minutes before he murdered Sally-Anne, Dixie saw a woman driving through a nearby road pull over and get out of her car to make a phone call. Dixie's immediate attack on the woman, in which he hit her on the head and slashed her face, came to a sudden end when a taxi came driving down the road, prompting Dixie to take flight. Dixie then waited for over 45 minutes for Sally-Anne to get out of her on-off boyfriend's car, the young man in question, Lewis Broston, having just given Sally-Anne a lift home after a night out. The two had been having a heated argument, and I'll tell you now that Lewis was, for a while, himself a suspect in Sally-Anne's murder. He drove off just as Sally-Anne, having since got out of his car, all but reached her front door. In 3 of the places where Dixie, who pounced on Sally-Anne before she got inside, stabbed Sally-Anne, the knife went all the way through Sally-Anne's body and came out the other side. When he was done stabbing his victim, Dixie waited somewhere out of sight to see if any of the neighbours would emerge from their homes to investigate, which didn't happen. By the time the man raped Sally-Anne, as he subsequently did when he saw that the coast was clear, Sally-Anne was very probably already dead, meaning that Dixie was very probably raping a corpse. After Dixie was convicted in 2017 of Sally-Anne's murder, members of his family vandalised Sally-Anne's grave, the man having 3 sons. Having pled not guilty to Sally-Anne's murder, but having no less been found guilty, sometime after the trial, the man admitted to having committed the murder, meaning that his family did what they did to Sally-Anne's grave for nothing. I'm assuming that they vandalised it to get their own back on Sally-Anne's family, having not believed that Dixie was guilty of the murder. While he was in jail awaiting trial, prison staff caught the man thingy baiting over newspaper cuttings portraying Sally-Anne's murder. In his trial, the man was convicted of his act of rape and attempted murder from 1987 and for his 2002 attack on a woman whose head he bashed with an iron pan. The categories of murder cases defined in law for which the imposition of a whole life order is justified, as we've heard, isn't exhaustive. On this basis, it's hard to understand why, with all his previous violent offences, Dixie dodged a whole life prison term, especially considering the case not only of Wayne Couzens, but also, for instance, of Simon Wilson and Jamie Reynolds, whose cases you can learn about via the videos that I've linked in the description box. Dixie is doing his 34-year minimum term at HMP Frankland, and you won't see me complaining if he ends up getting Ian Huntley. The most evil prisoner at HMP Long Lartin has got to be our next antagonist who killed to feel better. On the evening of the 20th of November 2021, 18-year-old Bobby-Ann McLeod from Plymouth, southwest England, went out to go and see her boyfriend. As she left the house, she told her dad she loved him exactly as she always did, and it turned out to be the last thing she ever said to him. Her path crossed moments later, you see, with 24-year-old Cody Ackland, a man obsessed with infamous serial killers who was out in his car looking for his own first victim. Bobby-Ann was at the bus stop around the corner waiting for a 50 when Ackland came up to her and hit her with a hammer. He then went back to his car and was going to drive away, and that was supposed to be it, but he noticed that Bobby-Ann was still alive. So he drove his car back to the bus stop and kidnapped her. He briefly considered taking Bobby-Ann to hospital, but feared that she would then expose him as her attacker. As such, he instead drove approximately 20 miles to a forest car park, dragged her out of the car and whacked her on the head repeatedly with a hammer. Chillingly, during the attack, Bobby-Ann told Ackland that she was scared, to which he responded, "So am I, I've never done this before." After his hammer attack on Bobby-Ann, he stood on the woman's neck to suffocate her. Even then, Bobby-Ann didn't actually die for another 3 whole hours. After dumping her body naked in a steep incline, Ackland drove home and went to sleep. Who was this evil young man, and why did he do what he did, scared as he apparently was while he did it? Ackland was born in Paderborn in Germany in 1997, where his dad was posted as a soldier. His parents split up when he was a child and he went to live with his mum in the Southway area of Plymouth. Growing up, he actually went to the same school as Bobby-Ann, but due to their 6-year age gap, they didn't know each other. In court, it was later stated that Ackland was bullied at school and began to have suicidal thoughts at the age of 9. His lawyer went on to say that there are reports of him being diagnosed with ADHD, dyslexia and anxiety and placed on medication, and he had a depressive history that dated back to the age of 12 and a half. After leaving school, Ackland did a variety of odd jobs, but his passion was music, which eventually led to him becoming the lead guitarist and songwriter for a local band called Rakuda. They were actually very popular in Plymouth, and their music was influenced by bands like Oasis. They had a cult following. However, the minute the murder was exposed, the group immediately disbanded. Personally, I'm getting Ian Watkins vibes. Those who knew Ackland described him as clever and thoughtful, but little could anyone have known that he was living a double life. Ackland was obsessed with serial killers, specifically Ted Bundy, who, as you probably know, is one of the worst murderers ever seen in America. While searching Ackland's phone, the police found over 3,000 disturbing images, including pictures of corpses and mutilated bodies. In the months leading up to Bobby-Ann's murder, Ackland meticulously researched serial killers, the clothing they'd worn, and he also researched weapons on DIY shop websites. The police also found a timeline of internet searches for the murder that highlighted his infatuation with the world's most sadistic killers. In the week before Bobby-Ann's murder, he looked up killers including Fred West and Ted Bundy. Days before the killing, he researched American serial killer Richard Chase and the man's victims, and he also searched for places like Dartmoor and Thornworthy forests. His initial attack on Bobby-Ann, as you may be aware, was similar to the kind perpetrated by the so-called bus stop killer Levi Belfield, who's doing 2 whole life orders for his 3 murders and his single attempted murder. Moreover, kidnapping a lone young woman from a bus stop is an emulation of the evil of one of Ackland's apparent idols, Fred West. The incel killer, Jake Davison, was, furthermore, a fellow Plymouth resident as well. The very day that Ackland took Bobby-Ann, he searched Ted Bundy again, and after Bobby-Ann's murder, he researched the detective leading the appeal for information on Bobby-Ann, whose name is Mike West. On the night of his murderous act, Ackland was watching TV and he felt he just needed to go out and do something. His recent breakup was on his mind and he was driving around seeing happy couples and growing jealous, resentful and angry. While driving past the bus stop, he noticed Bobby-Ann, who, he said, resembled girls that he'd previously dated. He then described how he parked his Ford Fiesta at the bottom of a grass bank beside the bus stop where Bobby-Ann was waiting and armed himself with a claw hammer, which he claimed he kept in his car to fix dents. You know what happened next. The following day, Sunday the 21st of November, the perpetrator drove to Tamerton Folly Arts, where he threw the murder weapon into a tributary of the River Tamar and disposed both of his and Bobby-Ann's blood-stained clothing at a nearby allotment. The murder weapon was never recovered. Ackland then spent the rest of the day socialising with his friends, eating pizza and practising with his band before drinking into the early hours at a pub lock-in. Those who saw Ackland that evening describe him as happier than usual, stating that he was only normally this happy when he was preparing for a gig. Ackland would later tell a psychiatrist that all the feelings of depression that he'd had before murdering Bobby-Ann had vanished, saying that the violent act had seemed to have rid him of those feelings. On the 23rd of November, the man walked into his local police station and confessed to Bobby-Ann's murder. Why did he do that? He said he wanted to help the police out. We have to be glad that he at least didn't follow the secrecy rule outlined in his serial killer handbook. In May 2022 at Plymouth Crown Court, Ackland got life with a minimum of 31 years. Gemma Mitchell is doing life at HMP Bronzefield, and she's the most heartless and manipulative inmate in that prison. Listen to how aggressively the police officers bang on the front door of Gemma Mitchell, the woman that they've come for on suspicion of murder. And listen in contrast to how politely Gemma responds to them despite their aggression. Weird.
Police! Hello there.
Hello, how are you?
Yeah, good. Who's your answer? Sorry, what's your name?
Sorry, we were asleep.
Are you Gemma?
Yeah, I am.
Okay, Gemma, just could you hold a second?
Sure,
Come on a second.
Sorry, could I
Gemma, do you want to come out?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, just want to see them.
Hand just see your hands. Alright, Gemma, at this moment I'm arresting you on suspicion of murder. Okay, you don't have to say anything, but you may have a defence. Do not mention one question, something which you later rely in court. Anything you do say may be given evidence, okay? Once we're in the cuffs.
Am I allowed to...
I'll go explain everything to you. Okay?
Should I get some
Yeah,
shoes
sorry.
then?
What?
If you want to one sec.
Inside?
Who's inside at the moment?
Mother.
Your mother?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is it?
If you want to... Oh, because someone lift that up.
Yeah. Let's step back inside.
Is anyone else inside? Just your mum?
Yeah.
There is someone else inside,
No,
or just your
that's
mum?
just my mum, yeah.
Alright, do you want to... Should I bring her or...
Bring her in.
Bring her in?
For a minute,
Well,
yeah.
we're just going to come in for a sec,
Yeah,
okay?
Sure.
This arrest comes from summer 2021. Born in 1984, Gemma had recently murdered her very good friend Deborah Chong for her money. Gemma was a qualified osteopath who had lived for a number of years in Australia, where she'd worked as an osteopath and also bought a home. She came back to the UK in 2015, but she retained her home out in Australia. She and her mum and her sister lived in a really big home in Willesden, northwest London, which was worth millions. However, it was in a state of disrepair and needed loads of work doing to it. The family paid a set of builders £230,000 to get the work done, but the builders nicked it. It was at that point that Gemma turned to her friend Deborah for financial assistance. Deborah was a widow in her 60s and she was indeed very wealthy, but she had paranoid schizophrenia and was on antipsychotic medication, and she would do things, for instance, like set the table for Boris Johnson, who was Prime Minister at the time, and also for the man who is now King Charles, but who at the point in question was Prince Charles. She honestly thought they were going to turn up any minute. Gemma knew both Deborah's money and Deborah's vulnerabilities. Here's your first twist. Gemma and Deborah became friends through church. They were both Christians, they got talking to each other at church and became really, really good mates. That is why Gemma thought she would have a chance of getting a loan from Deborah. Deborah initially agreed to the loan, but then for reasons that I couldn't find, she changed her mind. She did so knowing that Gemma's home was worth millions and that as such Gemma could just sell it. And she actually said to Gemma, until you sell your home, I don't want to see you. I don't need the aggro rather that you bring. She didn't say it quite like that. Gemma responded by politely saying, God has a plan for my house. Deborah might not have recognised this, but that was a threat, because God's plan for Gemma's house was for Gemma to murder Deborah and cut her head off, and then forge Deborah's will to say that it was leaving, or Deborah rather was leaving £700,000 to Gemma, because that is exactly what happened. So on the 11th of June, Gemma walked all the way from Willesden to Wembley, because Wembley was where Deborah lived, with a suitcase and some other bags. She killed Deborah and cut her head off, and then put the body parts into the suitcase and the bags that she was carrying, and walked back home again. And she started telling people that Deborah had gone away to see her friends and that she would be back when she was ready. Deborah's lodger, though, could see that Deborah hadn't taken anything. Her glasses, her phone, her clothes were all still in her home, so he didn't believe what Gemma was saying for a minute. Gemma was seen on surveillance cameras walking to and from Deborah's home on the day that she killed Deborah. When she was walking there, the bags and the suitcase that she had with her were not very heavy at all. Gemma was walking in quite a strident way. Nothing was weighing her down. It was a completely different story when she left Deborah's home. And some days later, Gemma took Deborah's body and dumped it, but to do so, she decided to hire a car. She hired a car using the phone that she'd nicked from the home of a neighbour who had recently died. She literally broke into the person's home and nicked whatever she could get her hands on, by all accounts, including the person's phone. She then drove all the way from Willesden down to Salcombe in Devon in southwest England. We're talking a good 4 or 5 hour drive, and dumped Deborah's body and its separated head in some forest area. And then she drove back, got a flat tyre on the way back, and had to call someone to sort it for her. And then she got it sorted and was able to finish her journey back home. The very next day, Deborah's body was found, and the people who found it, of course, reported it. Down at the Nick, after her arrest, Gemma found that she hadn't covered her tracks in any way. I've already said she was on every single camera between her home and Deborah's home, but there was also a very important further piece of evidence against her. You remember that she had a flat tyre on the way back, and she had to get someone to come and fix that for her? Well, listen to what he said.
And they've said that the person driving the Volvo waited in the car all that time with the windows down and the front door open, the passenger door open, when it was literally chucking it down with rain and it was windy. Why is that, Gemma?
No comment.
The car stank, didn't it, Gemma?
No comment.
Stunk of a dead person.
No comment.
Stunk of Deborah's decomposing body. Is that right, Gemma?
No comment.
Gemma went no comment in her police interview all the way through, and in court she didn't give evidence. She was found guilty, and in October 2022 she got life with a minimum term of 34 years. We're now off to HMP Whitemoor to meet a man who committed 3 of his 4 murders in prison, but we have to stop by a couple of other notorious institutions on the way. As a child, Robert Maudsley was systematically essayed and beaten by his father, whose very violence against his son, one of the man's 12 children, was usually instigated by none other than his wife, Maudsley's mother. At 21, Maudsley had moved from Liverpool down to London, and, between substance abuse and suicide attempts, he was supporting himself by working as a prostitute. When a punter of his by the name of John Farrell showed him pictures of the kids that he'd essayed, Maudsley garrotted him. After handing himself in and being convicted of manslaughter, he was sent in 1974 to Broadmoor, a secure psychiatric unit. In 1977, he teamed up with a fellow patient by the name of David Cheeseman and got another patient, David Francis, a PDF file, into a cell and tortured him to death. Afterwards, Maudsley held the man's body high in the air for the guards to see what he'd done. The victim was found to have a spoon sticking out of his skull after having it rammed into one of his ears, but even though Maudsley said that he had eaten some of the man's brain, no evidence of that was ever found. That didn't stop Maudsley gaining the media dubbing of Hannibal the Cannibal, however. After this killing, the man was sent to Wakefield prison where, a year later, in a single day, he garrotted both wife killer and SE ex-offender Salni Darwood and child rapist William Roberts, his plan for the day having been to kill 7. As a result, he was put into solitary confinement before being moved in 1983 into one of 2 specially built underground cells made of perspex, which can only be reached by passing through 17 steel doors, where all the furniture is made of reinforced cardboard and where flies and cockroaches abound. The man is in his cell for 23 hours a day and is on a so-called 4-man unlock, meaning that when he's let out for his hour a day of exercise, he has to be accompanied by at least 4 screws. In 2000, he asked to be allowed to kill himself by taking a cyanide capsule, but the prison authorities said no. He said, "In that case, can I please have a budgie?" But the authorities again said no. In spring 2025, he was moved to HMP Whitemoor, where he's been held on F-Wing, a place for prisoners with personality disorders. And, if news reports are to be believed, he complains about being around others despite having spent 47 years in solitary confinement. HMP Belmarsh is more commonly known as HMP Hellmarsh, and it's where double murderer Shane March will be for a very long time.
Record this.
Everything's cool, recorded in the van, sir.
I don't ever want to come up. Keep me in it. Keep me in Joe. Anyway, I want my grave in a Joe. Yeah? Yeah! That's me. You see my face? Yeah!
This is the shameless and unrepentant reaction of 46-year-old Shane March to his arrest for murder. In the early hours of the 22nd of July 2024, over at his girlfriend's flat in Walthamstow, East London, Shane March picked up a knife and stabbed his very girlfriend, 32-year-old Alana Odysseus, who was the mother of a 2-year-old and was also expecting Shane March's own baby, and stabbed her at least 19 times, as well as slashing her at least 5 times. Just before 3 a.m, neighbours found Alana outside, bleeding and repeatedly naming March as her attacker. Despite the efforts of her neighbours and then the emergency services, Alana couldn't be saved, the woman being pronounced dead at 3:52 a.m. After Alana died, her daughter, Victoria, was found unharmed inside the flat, the little girl having since become an orphan as her father had died some time before. March had a string of previous convictions for violent offences, the least of which not being the act of murder that he perpetrated in 2000 at the age of 21. 6 months after getting out of prison on licence, which happened in January 2013, he was sent back to prison for stamping on his then partner's belly. Her pregnant belly, if you want to know. Something of a trend with this guy by the look of things. After getting out again in February 2018, the man didn't commit any known further offences until the moment when he stabbed his girlfriend to death. At this point, the perpetrator had only been in a relationship with Alana for about 4 months, and the two had only recently found out that Alana was pregnant, which March was less than happy about, let's say.
She said that the pregnancy, rather than being a source of shared joy, had been the cause of further arguments and tension. March thought that she should have an abortion. Alana's sister, Jasmine, heard some voice notes played to her of conduct by March. He could be heard denying that the unborn child was his and demanding that she should have an abortion.
Alana was vulnerable. She'd suffered serious personal losses, including that of her former partner, Ruslan, Victoria's father, who had committed suicide. She had long since confided in family and friends about the perpetrator's controlling and abusive behaviour towards her, which included both physical violence and emotional violence.
Not long after that relationship began, she began to tell her family and friends that he was coercing and controlling her. She didn't use that technical term, but what she described were classic signs of that condition. She said that she wasn't allowed to talk to people by him, that he would telephone her at all times of the day and night to find out where she was, who she was with, and what she was doing. There were video calls so that he could check where she was by looking at the background. She also said that the relationship was dogged by constant argument. She admitted that she was frightened of him and that said that he had assaulted her. He had smashed a glass in her face and on another occasion had cut her forehead. She did tell her sister that he had accused her of cheating on him and that he had required her to delete the telephone numbers of any male contacts from her phone.
Only hours before her death, Alana had WhatsApped her sister Jasmine and told her about feeling unwell, about the perpetrators acting up, about her pain and her boyfriend's indifference to it, and about her need to protect her little girl Victoria. She told her sister, quote, "Can't help who you love, but he don't love any of us," unquote.
During the evening of the 21st of July 2024, an exchange of messages on WhatsApp took place between Alana and her sister Jasmine, during which Alana was explaining that she was in pain and that he, March, didn't care. She said that she couldn't, quote, do this, close quote. The exchange finished when she said to her sister in a message, quote, "Don't want no one, wanna be alone where I ain't hurt."
Later on that evening, Alana and her boyfriend had a blazing row that eventually spilled out onto the street, the perpetrator taking that opportunity to lock Alana out for a while after subsequently going back inside himself. And keep in mind that this was Alana's two-bed flat. This event took place around midnight on July the 22nd, 2024. Sometime after Alana got back inside, she got into another blazing row with her boyfriend, which took place in the kitchen, and this time it was about the man's trainers. That appears to have been what triggered the perpetrator's murderous act on Alana. What I can't tell you is whether or not the impairment to the man's cognitive function, which was occasioned by the brain injury that he suffered at the age of 17, played any role in the man's act of murder against his girlfriend. Likewise, I can't tell you if that same problem that I've just described played any role in the first murder that he committed back in 2000. After murdering his girlfriend, March went out, dumped 3 phones of his, one of which having later been recovered and having been found to hold 2 voice notes in which the perpetrator admitted to murdering his girlfriend.
"I just killed someone and I need to go back to jail. Mom, I just killed a woman and I'm going back to jail."
Next, the man went to Cream's Cafe, not far away. The employee working that shift called the police after March told him what he'd done. By 5 a.m. then, March was in the back of a police van on his way to the Nick.
I don't regret nothing. Yeah? Give me the death chamber. Yeah? That's what I want. A lethal injection and put me in my misery. Yeah? And let me just drop this job. Either way, it doesn't bother me. I'm devil's picnic. Yeah? There's a place for me now in hell. Thank you. Thank you to the kind officers. Thank you. We call this yeah?
Everything's cool, recorded in the van, sir.
I don't ever want to come up. Keep me in there. Keep me in jail. Anyway, I want my grave in a jail. Yeah? Yeah! That's me. You see my face? Yeah!
After eventually pleading guilty to his charge of murder, a guilty plea tending to reduce the sentence, and keep that point in mind, March bunked his sentencing hearing, which took place at the Old Bailey on the 31st of October 2025, Halloween in other words.
You and everyone else in court should understand three things about the minimum term that I am about to impose. First, you must serve every day of it before the parole board can even consider releasing you. Following your arrest for the murder of Aleena, you were recalled to prison to continue serving your life sentence for the murder of Andre Drummond. There are therefore no days on remand in custody to be deducted from the minimum term that I must impose. The truth of the matter is that given your age and the length of the minimum term I must impose, it may be that you will never be released from prison, but the chance exists. Shane March, please stand up. For the murder of Aleena Odysseus, I sentence you to life imprisonment with a minimum term to serve of 42 years.
So off March went with at least a vague hope of one day being a free man again, at the age of 89 to be exact, since he was 47 when he got his 42 years. He then lodged an appeal for a sentence reduction in order, of course, to increase his chances of eventual freedom. For her own part, however, the Solicitor General, Ellie Reeves, lodged an appeal of her own, saying that, for reasons that she laid out, March's guilty plea meant nothing and shouldn't then have stopped the man getting a forever sentence, a whole life prison sentence, life without parole. On the 26th of March 2026, the Court of Appeal answered both appeals, and it was a double defeat for March.
It's quite true that even in a case where a whole life order is under consideration, a guilty plea may operate to reduce the seriousness of the offence so that such an order can be avoided. In our judgment, this is clearly not such a case. The plea to murder was entered only when he had no other alternative open to him. The point had come when he had to mount a defence in order to discharge the burden of proof which lay on him if he was to be able to reduce the crime of murder to a crime of manslaughter. He simply had no evidence to offer. In those circumstances, his guilty plea should have attracted no substantial weight at all, and in our judgment, the judge did fall into error by giving it some weight at the point when he was deciding that a whole life order was not required. For all of these reasons, therefore, we refuse leave to appeal against sentence, and that application is dismissed. We grant the Solicitor General leave to this court under Section 36 of the 1988 Act as unduly lenient. We conclude that for the reasons we have given, the sentence was unduly lenient. We quash it. Means that the offender will never be released.
Shane March will now never become eligible to apply for parole. He's going to be locked up for the rest of his life. Danilo Restivo did his first murder over in Italy before coming to the UK to develop his murderous career, and he now lives at HMP Full Sutton. On the morning of the 12th of November 2002, mother of two Heather Barnett was, inside her own home, bludgeoned repeatedly with a hammer, and she also suffered a cut to her throat that ran from ear to ear. Her body was found with her breasts having been cut off and placed next to her head, her bra having been cut open at the front for her breasts to have been chopped off. Her jeans were unfastened and slightly pulled down, with her upper clothing pulled to the level of her breasts. In her left hand was a bunch of her own hair, while in her right hand was a bunch of someone else's hair, her right hand having been placed on her lower abdomen. Heather was a self-employed seamstress who worked from her home in Bournemouth, South England. She had a 14-year-old son called Terry and an 11-year-old daughter called Caitlin, and she got on with her children's father, who she had long since split up with. She also had no known enemies, and her front door showed no signs of forced entry. But she also had a neighbour called Danilo Restivo, who had a fetish both for sitting behind young women on buses and illicitly and secretly cutting off pieces of their hair, and for murder, Heather Barnett having been the man's second murder victim. Born in April 1972 in Sicily, Restivo, who's known as the hairdresser of Potenza and whose distinctive physical features include his bulging eyes, a point that becomes important later on, came over to the UK in March 2002 and moved into a rented room in the home of an Italian lady by the name of Fiamma Marsango, who he had met online. Fiamma's home was at 93 Chatsworth Road on the corner of Capstan Road, and it stood approximately 20 yards directly across from the home of Heather Barnett. Heather and Restivo were acquainted with one another before Restivo murdered her, but according to an ex-boyfriend of Heather's by the name of Rodney Brown, Heather was scared of Restivo. Notwithstanding, on the 6th of November 2002, Restivo went round Heather's asking her to make a set of curtains for his landlady to go in her room as a Christmas present for her, and I should tell you that by this stage, Restivo and Fiamma had become more to each other than landlady and houseguest. It was attested, however, at some point that Fiamma's room was a total dump, with rain coming in through the roof and with mould, so one wonders how much of a priority getting new curtains would have been to her. Anyway, once Restivo left again, Heather noticed that her spare key was missing, forcing her to have the locks changed. In an email to her sister, she explained that she thought that Restivo had pinched the key. When, on returning home from school on the day that their mother was murdered, Terry and Caitlin found their dead mother's body, which, having been dragged from Heather's sewing room after the murder, was lying on the bathroom floor, they were, after running into the street hysterical and shocked, taken in by none other than Restivo and Fiamma. Fiamma, though, had nothing to do with Heather's murder. Upon their initial investigation, police were convinced that the killer was local and had some sort of connection to Heather and to her children, and that the person also lived in close proximity to Heather, because no one had noticed any strangers around the area that morning. Then again, there could have been strangers, but people just hadn't spotted them. But also, from the timing of the attack, namely shortly after 8:37 a.m. when Heather got back from taking her kids to school, the suspect appeared to know Heather's routine. Police noted how Heather's murder had been planned with chilling precision, including the killer being incredibly forensically aware, having worn gloves, as the man did, and having brought a change of clothes with him, leaving behind only a green towel of his own that was stained with his blood, and which actually was never used as something that could lead to the man's being charged for Heather's murder. But don't worry, because eventually he, of course, was charged with Heather's murder and convicted of it and is rotting away in prison even as we speak. Heather's post-mortem took place the following day, and it was conducted by a man called Alan Anscombe. Heather had 10 separate injuries to her head, one of those injuries having been so severe that it had penetrated through her skull, exposing brain tissue. On the front of her abdomen there was a vertical shallow interrupted cut, 24 centimetres in length, as well as 2 other injuries. With blood located in her windpipe and infraalveolar bleeding, it was thought that the blood had entered her lungs, potentially as she took her last gasps of breath. As well as head injuries, Heather had received other wounds, which Anscombe recorded as not having been random and having appeared to have been inflicted with care and control. Heather's throat was cut all the way across, with an incision made from 2 centimetres below her right ear all the way over to her left ear. This cut had penetrated right down to her spine, cutting all the way across her airway and across the arteries. It appeared, furthermore, that a shallow knife had been cut down Heather's abdomen for a length of 24 centimetres. Anscombe believed that a knife or some other sharp instrument was used to cut Heather's breasts off, noting that there was nothing to suggest any great skill had been used, unlike where some of the other injuries inflicted on Heather were concerned. Police also noted that there was a discoloration on Heather's knickers, which were more pronounced on the inside of the knickers than on the outside, which suggested that they had been caused by something blood-soaked. A microscopic examination of the discoloration revealed a pattern that appeared to have been created by a knitted garment. Restivo became the prime suspect in Heather's murder 6 months after the murder, when police discovered the man's connection to the disappearance of a 16-year-old girl by the name of Elisa Claps from 1993 back in Restivo's hometown of Potenza. The details of Elisa's own story are coming up soon. In their subsequent surveillance operation of the man, whose findings were quoted against him when he stood trial for Heather's murder, they caught him stalking and staring at women and having in his car a change of clothing like the one that he had taken over to Heather's when he murdered her, gloves, a balaclava and a number of bladed weapons. None of this, however, was evidence for the man's guilt for Heather's murder, so for now, police couldn't touch him. What they both could and did do, however, was to contact numerous people who had close relationships with the man and warn them of the potential threat to their lives coming from the man. When Fiamma Marsango got her warning, though, she ignored it, and that's not the only thing about her partner that she ignores, as you'll soon hear. One of the 6 times that Restivo brazenly cut off some hair belonging to a random young woman who was on the same bus as him was witnessed by a man called Mark Goddard, who described Restivo as having bulbous eyes, remember those, spectacles and dark hair, and recounted that the man had sat behind the girl, pulled some of her hair under the metal handrail on the chair and rested it on his lap. Both the hair and his hand were underneath the anorak that he'd been wearing, but which he'd since taken off, and it looked to Mark as if the man was mthingy baiting. On the 17th of March 2010, nearly 17 years after she went missing, the mummified body of 16-year-old Elisa Claps was found in the loft of the Most Holy Trinity Church in the town of Potenza. Elisa hadn't been even remotely attracted to Restivo, who had, in the months before he trapped her in the church and stabbed her to death, been pestering her for a date. But she was a very kind-hearted and compassionate girl, a devout Catholic in fact, who didn't like to see the youth feeling hurt. When she agreed on the 11th of September 1993 to go and meet him at church the following day, she had laid aside her fear of him, which she had disclosed to her big brother Gildo more than once before then, to spare his feelings. And then the following day, when she went to meet him, she told her family that she was just going to Mass. She took her friend, Eliana Di Chilis, I've probably mispronounced that, sorry, with her, but asked her to wait by some phone boxes outside for the half hour that she expected to be inside the church with Restivo, and Eliana agreed to that. What then went undiscovered for the next 17 years was Restivo's act of stabbing Elisa 9 times from behind and 3 times from the front, including to her back, neck and breasts, going as far as the anterior part of her thoracic vertebrae. The waistband of her trousers was hitched up above her waist, and the zip had been lowered and the jeans had been opened, while the young lady's bra had been undone and cut between the cups, and also her knickers were cut as well. After killing her, the perpetrator cut off some of her hair and left it near her hands. As you're seeing, Restivo had something to him that made him degrade his 2 victims in a very similar and a specific way after killing them. Fetished or fetishized acts of murder being what the man clearly perpetrated, to go with his vastly less violent fetish, it would seem, for cutting off hair belonging to young women that he didn't know without either their permission or their knowledge. The discovery of Elisa Clapps's body is what, in May 2010, 2 months after the discovery, enabled police at long last to charge Restiva with the murder of Heather Barnett, which led, in turn, in June 2011, to the man's conviction for the murder of Heather Barnett. In November of the same year, the man was found guilty over in Italy and in his absence for the murder of Elisa Claps and was sentenced to 30 years, which of course he'll never do because we've got him over here doing time for the murder of Heather Barnett. The man lost his appeal against both that conviction and his conviction for Heather Barnett's murder. What he did win, though, was a sentence reduction coming from the fact that the judge had counted his murder of Elisa Claps as an aggravating feature in his sentencing decision before Restiva was found guilty of that earlier murder. In this way, Restivo got the whole life term that he was given for Heather Barnett's murder quashed and replaced with a 40-year minimum term instead. Then again, when the Court of Appeal announced the man's new sentence, they warned him that he would probably still be locked up for the rest of his life, his chances of ever winning parole with those 2 horrific murders behind him being virtually nil. Restivo is actually suspected of being a serial killer who is behind the disappearances of 7 other women from a range of European countries. Whether any of those disappearances will ever be proven to have come from him, however, remains to be seen. He and Fiona are still together, in case you want to know, and since Fiona still lives where she was living when the man that she got married to in 2004 murdered Heather Barnett, she has to travel all the way up to Yorkshire to visit her husband, who's doing his time at HMP Full Sutton, a Category A prison. Rose West is HMP Newhall's most notorious and evil prisoner, and her sexual depravity has by no means come to an end. Rose West was born in 1953 in North Devon. Between 1973 and 1987, alongside her husband, she tortured, raped and murdered all of 10 young women. On her own, in 1971, she murdered the stepdaughter of Fred West. By that point, she and Fred had got married and Fred was in prison. She told him what she'd done and he didn't care. They used to get these young women to come into their home. They lived in this really big home in Cromwell Street in Gloucester in southwest England, and then they would lead them down to a cellar that Fred had purpose built for the mission of torturing and murdering these young women, and that is what the 2 of them did. They would both essay and grape them over a number of days. They would hang them upside down before eventually killing them. They had several children, 7 in total, and in fact of the 7 children, 3 were fathered by punters that Rose had in her work as a prostitute. That's something she started doing after she had her 2nd child, and she really loved it. She used to advertise, she used to go out and into the West Indian community and get black guys to come and shag her for money. Rose and Fred were in the habit of essaying their own children. In 1987, one of their children, who was 16 at the time, Heather West, was standing up to Fred saying, "No, leave me alone, I don't want you to do the thing to me." So they dragged her down to the cellar and murdered her, and it was on Rose's instigation. Fred West killed himself in prison. Rose, meanwhile, has been locked up since 1995 on a whole life order. During her time in prison, she's gathered a reputation for being a bully. She had a relationship with fellow child murderer Myra Hindley, who was also doing a whole life order until she died in 2002. As I record this, Rose is in her 70s and she's actually getting end-of-life care. Despite that, in February 2026, it was reported that she'd recently committed an SA against another inmate. The victim was a 20-year-old who Rose West, had spent weeks grooming before she pounced on her. So even now, old age, frail, at death's door, she's still capable of violent sexual attacks. If this video has gripped you, I recommend you to watch this one next. I'll meet you there.